Just watched Dallas beat Minnesota. They're up 3-0. The Celtics are also up 3-0. And it looks like we're going to have a Celtics-Mavs finals, barring one of the great comebacks in the history of professional sports. Where do you want to start, Russillo?
We have to start with Dallas because this is the most impressive thing I think that has happened, even though Minnesota taking out Denver. You're like, they're really going to go in there and beat Denver at their place in Game 7. And then they do that. And yet here we have two teams that I do think are close, but just the mastery of Luka. And we already know what's about to happen. I know we're going to talk about it on the pod today, but there's a reason why over the course of these years where I'm like, if you just want the ball in somebody's hands in the biggest moment, I don't know why you pick anybody other than Luka. And it's not just the made three against Gobert in Game 2. It feels like it's impossible when he's cooking. And he just dropped and emptied the entire toolbox on this team again. There's all these different plays. There's a bunch of different reasons this series is 3-0. But Luka's the best player that's still alive. We knew that when we ranked him coming out of it. And I just think it has to be a lot of praise for Dallas to start this because this is so incredible.
Well, now it's starting to feel like the best player alive championship belt is in play. Because if Luka keeps going here and then beats Boston in the finals, Jokic is like he just found a place for it in his living room, right? Like right above the TV. He just cleared a cabinet out. He just put it in there, and then he's like, "Wait, what? I'm losing this." If Luka pulls this off, he's going to be the best player in the league. It's crazy because I'm the same person who said a couple months ago I thought the distance between Jokic and everybody else was as significant as, this is Justin Termini's point first, but as significant as anybody since LeBron in 2013. But you look at Dallas here, 16-4 to end the season, 11-4 in the playoffs, getting better as the playoffs go along. And it's now hitting the point where you almost feel like they're like the freaking Yankees in the late 90s, where it's like, if this is a close game in the 8th inning, you're probably going to lose. This is how it's going to play out.
Yeah, let's do the belt thing. Can we hold off on that?
Yeah, we'll hold off. We'll put it later.
I just feel like there have been a lot of belt transfers in a very short amount of time, and that's a topic in itself. But the closer argument's perfect because, this is kind of by design when everything's supposed to work out. It's like, okay, can you have two people that can get their own shots in these impossible moments at the end of playoff games when everything else is falling apart? Do you have two players that can get you good looks? And I would have never wanted to be in the Kyrie business. I don't think anybody pushing back at the time was wrong, even though that's kind of the way it plays out. But even tonight, there was a play where, they were debating on the broadcast, like what to do with Luka, need more doubles, more of the debate carry over at the end of Game 2 against Gobert. And, it just sounds better to be like, hey, double, he's got to double more. You got to keep two with him. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be looking to just cheat off of somebody else, but it's not like Luka isn't going to figure that part of it out either. He brought up Gafford for a screen, and I was waiting to see, are two going to stay with Luka off of the Gafford thing? Because Gafford, instead of Lively, is a downgrade for Dallas because he's not the passer that Lively is, which is one of the most remarkable things about how this team is built, that this kid's a rookie, and he's making like the right reads in big, stakes playoff games. So as the screen is about to be set with Gafford, Luka knows exactly what he's going to do. He swings it to Kyrie, who kicks it to PJ Washington in the corner, and PJ hits like one of the biggest shots of the game, that three. And it looked like
it was 104 when that happened.
It looked like it wasn't really that big of a deal. And in reality, Luka was like, "Oh, you think you're going to like trick me?"
Yeah.
So he doesn't even have to, he's kind of in that gravity conversation of the Currys and the Jokic, where even if you think he's not really impacting anything, he was 35 feet away from the hoop. And that attempt to defend him, which he already could tell what they were going to try to do, was like, you guys are absolutely wasting your time because the ball's not even going to be here by the time you guys come up. And then you're going to be spread out behind me.
We talked about this in the past. I agree with everything you just said. The pick your poison kind of last level of basketball, because Jokic was like this too, where the defense just kind of has to decide at some point, all right, what are we good with, because we're going to be giving up something. And the part of what I don't understand about what Minnesota's been doing this series is I would just want all the role players to decide the games. I'm fine with Derek Jones and PJ Washington and whoever. That's what I want with the, like when Jaden Hardy was in there for a lot of spots. Just let those guys knock yourself out, guys, because that's what they're doing on the other end with Edwards. They want all the side guys to decide the game for Minnesota. On the Dallas side, Luka and Kyrie, like, if you're going to stay home at these other dudes and just let those dudes go one-on-one, which they've done over and over again in crunch time in these 3 games, it just feels like you have no chance. Especially the Luka part. I don't know why Gobert came back in this game, Russillo. And we'll have the whole Gobert conversation later, but I think the best lineup they had for whatever they're trying to do, the best they looked was when Naz Reid was out there. And there was a Naz Reid, Kyle Anderson, Anthony Edwards, McDaniels. I forget who the 5th was. But that when they were able to move and switch, that felt like the closest they were to solving Dallas. Otherwise, I don't know what you do.
The problem is I was with you. I was going, okay, cool. They're going to try something else, because even when Dallas went small and then they brought Gafford back in, and then Powell gets minutes tonight because Lively doesn't come back from the game, and that was a brutal knee to the back of his head. So you wonder what's going to happen for him the rest of the way. But Minnesota's still big when they're small. So you're going, all right, maybe they can survive here. But the thing is, Bill, they didn't do anything with it. They didn't do anything with it. It was 2 Naz Reid attacks on Luka, which were fine. Okay, he got him once, and then the other one was the foul. And then there was a weird Kyle Anderson late shot clock thing where that was happening a bunch. So when you looked at like Rudy, when he came back in from not being in the beginning, they were actually -2 through all of it. And there's like this big Rudy thing where, there's a lot of people that I respect that are really smart, and they'll throw this plus minus stuff that we've seen in front of you. It's like he's actually had the best differential of any player on the Timberwolves. And I'll just go, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not really sure that that's necessarily what I see. This isn't a Rudy problem game, by the way, so let me probably just stop myself there, because I was excited about that, as you were, but Minnesota had 102 points at 5:54 left to go in the 4th quarter. All right?
Yeah.
They basically scored 2 points to close against a 13-1 run, and then the last 2 points were the Edwards layup. So
and the shots were awful. They were all end of the shot clock, like just stilted toilet bowl offense.
So there was some minutes in there where I'm thinking, okay, cool. Like, let's see Ant attack. There should be space. They're going to space the floor. They're going to switch. I mean, they haven't really stopped this Dallas closing group yet anyway, so let's try something else. And then Kyrie got right into the paint a couple times. So I think Finch was looking at it going, all right, Luka's getting deeper. Kyrie won a drive, so they brought Rudy back in.
Yeah, we need a shot blocker.
But the problem is they didn't get Luka into switches. They didn't bring Ant up. Maybe they're worried if McDaniels is setting the switch, then they'll just ignore him and then 2 stay with Ant. There's a conversation there about like how much do you set screens for Ant because you're bringing more traffic his way. But when they went small, they actually didn't do any of the things that I was excited about them potentially doing, is the point I'm trying to make.
I wonder why Denver couldn't unlock Minnesota the way Dallas has. And I wonder if
rim protection.
Well, but also they went through it last year. They're playing for 8.5 months, however long it was. Then this year they got the big bullseye, and they talked about how they ran out of gas. Their role guys kind of disappeared. But when you watch what Dallas has been able to do to Minnesota and put their big guys in space, I wonder why Denver didn't do that more. I don't really know the answer. I'm sure they're watching this series going, damn. On the other hand, Luka and Kyrie had 66 tonight, and it felt like anytime they needed a big basket, they were getting it somehow. Like the level of shot making, especially in the 4th quarter, was ridiculous. Where it felt like Minnesota played almost perfect defense, and Dallas would still hit a shot. There's a fun Luka Gobert thing I was actually looking up over the weekend after game 2, because I was wondering, like, it really seems like Luka hates Gobert. What's this about? And I was like deep diving it, going through YouTube and stuff. My theory, and I hope somebody asks Luka this, I think it dates back to the 2020 Olympics. Slovenia lost to France by 1 point. And it was, remember the game? Batum had the block. He blocked somebody at the rim, right at the buzzer, and France won by 1. And in that game, Luka had Gobert in a switch for a second, and Batum came over and he got rid of it. And the guy he got rid of it to went to the basket and got blocked. And I wonder if ever since then, Luka's like, I hate this guy. I'm just going to, but there's been other stuff, like he's punched him a couple times during games, like little sneaky Gobert punches that it seems like it's not a punch, but it is, little elbows. They've gone at it a couple times, but there really seems to be a hop in his step for Luka. going against Gobert, which I've enjoyed. I like the animosity in this series. I think it's been fun. And same thing with Edwards, where he hit that point in the third quarter, he was like, fuck this, I'm not going down this way, and just took over the game for like 4 minutes, but couldn't keep it going.
No, because they had gotten Dallas into the bonus with like 8.5 minutes, 9 minutes to go. And if you look at the free throws in that quarter alone, like the game had slowed down. Ant has this great stretch. He has the dunk. He has the turnaround. He has the bank. And you're like, okay, maybe he's actually going to do this, because this is what he's saddled with, the hope of like, hey, if you're going to be one of these guys, like you have to be better than you've been in this series. And I have a ton on Ant that's incredibly disappointing. There's all these big moments where you're like, you just have to be better than this. And I don't know that there's necessarily a reason we could apply. When somebody's middle-aged and they end up playing below the standards, we never say, oh, he's middle-aged. So I don't know if it's just youth. It's kind of the way basketball works and sports works. But the Luka part of it, I mean, he kind of gets into it with everybody. It's like that Clippers team with Doc and Chris Paul and Blake and DeAndre and Austin Rivers was on the team. They got into it with everybody. I remember one night we were trying to rank. We were like, okay, how many teams have they had a thing with? And I think Luka is almost the individual version of that Clippers team.
It's a good call. He's going to go over great in Boston. I can't wait for a finals with him arguing 45 calls. He's so great, though, man. The thing, and obviously he's been doing this forever, but to watch him do it on the biggest stage, where the pace that he plays at, when he gets the half step on somebody, and then just keeps the guy on him, almost like a hockey player. And once he has you on your hip, you kind of don't have an option, because he'll just stop suddenly and then you're crashing into him, right? You can't reach around because they'll call a foul. He's too big to get around. And there's just, and then he's got that little 8-foot floater. He can stop. He can just go to the basket. He can then throw the alley-oop. And once he gets the step, watching him just use and abuse McDaniels, I thought was pretty interesting. You just get too much size for him. You know who the type of player to guard Luka is, Russillo? I do feel like it's a little Nas Reed-ish, and I don't know why they haven't gone to that more, because I think the Celtics, Tatum and Brown, they're actually in pretty good shape. They're not going to stop Luka, but they have the type of tall athletes that at least you're going to make him work, get to his spots. But I don't know why they didn't try Nas Reed on him more, because Nas Reed was good on Jokic too. McDaniels is too small to me.
Well, he's not stout enough. So I would agree there. And he's always going to get a couple dumb fouls. He had the reach in that was silly, and then he had another one where it looked like he was just mad, but it didn't, I don't think, take away. I don't feel like he was playing defense as if he was in foul trouble, because that's the thing with McDaniels. Like, we can't fall in love with like how aggressive he is on Booker and the stuff he was doing with Murray. And then, I mean, we can always find fouls with he and Cat where you're like, what are you doing? But you kind of have to sign up for a lot of that if you're going to fall in love with like the physicality and the challenging and the reaching and trying to get away at, just slowing the other player down. But with Luka, it's an entirely different animal. The hockey player analogy is perfect. It's kind of like a tight end who ends up in the end zone with a corner on him, where it's like, you may think you're defending me, but you're not. Like, I'm too big for you. And the craziest thing is, it's not about Luka turning the corner. It's just about him playing with all of this pace. Where he's watching it live when I went to that Clippers game, like, I knew what to expect because I'd seen it before, but there'll be moments he's in the paint and everything's stopped around him and nobody knows necessarily what to do. And it almost feels like it's easier. Like, I remember Nash would actually have an easier time making layups because everybody was freaked out about what he was going to do with the ball towards everybody else. So you get that scoring part of it with Luka, and the size and the touch. And then something Legler talked about with me, which I loved. He's so great at the late kick out. Yeah. Like, you'll think, okay, this drive is over. He's putting it up. Okay. Like, that lob he had left to right to Gafford through all of those bodies. He had another drive in the first half where he's like up on one leg. The shot is about to happen and he just turns and gets it to the right corner. I think it was a Jones 3. We knew how special he was. I voted him second MVP. So, just by default, because I thought it was so close with all of those players that I started just kind of dividing it by like, who do I actually think is the better player of these players? And I only had one guy ahead of him. And there's a reason.
I don't know. There's one guy that I can remember in the last 5-6 years who I felt like actually did a really good job on Luka. This is a deep pull. And somebody mentioned this to me recently, and I was like, oh, yeah, it was Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons did a good job on him. There's a couple bad Luka box scores against Ben Simmons teams. And I think that's the type of guy. I think it's got to be like 6'9" and strong and athletic, which, of course, there's 4 or 5 guys like that in the league. Ironically, Tatum's one of them. And I wonder if Tatum is, when it's Boston-Dallas, if that's going to be part of what Boston does, is it's going to be Tatum and Jalen, but basically Tatum fourth quarter. But then you're putting on all these defensive miles on Tatum. You're risking foul trouble with Tatum. You know, it's
asking a lot.
Little balance. Yeah, it's asking a lot.
Maybe to close a game, you know.
And then Jalen probably for the first 3 quarters. But the great thing about this Jalen season is, you know, he's really accepted the defensive challenge. And I think he's been genuinely impactful on defense. And there's been some of the better players in the league. Like there was that Zion game he had this season where he's just like, okay, I got it. I'm going to take this guy. So they have 2 really good guys to throw at him, but then you bring the Kyrie piece in it. And that's another pretty solid spot for Boston where they have these 2 really, really excellent defensive guards that they can at least throw at him and make him make some shots. He'll still make them. It doesn't really make, you know, I don't know if anyone's shutting down Kyrie when he's like this. The crazy thing about it, I don't feel like he's played at this level really for like 6 or 7 years, like with the speed, the decision-making, the shot-making, combined with what he's doing defensively. Because the defense is where he really went sideways and really seemed like a liability, especially like that Brooklyn Celtics series, remember 2 years ago? As that went on, it just felt like they started hunting him. And that's one of the things, I know he's been putting up points, but I've been really impressed by the all-around stuff with him. It's an incredible redemption story. Somebody I gave up on as a basketball star. I'm not saying
there's
like
nothing that compares. Go ahead.
No, I'm just like other people were in. I'm not saying because I gave up on him that matters, but it's just like I just didn't think we would see a 2-way performance like this from him at this stage of his career. I'd kind of given up on it.
It might matter to him to hear you say that.
Funny, Kyrie at a press conference. Hey, I heard Bill Simmons. He's reconsidered some of his thoughts. Just want to say that means a lot.
He had 2 plays. The shot he hit left-handed, going right to left, and Ant actually gave it a decent contest.
Yeah,
and it was off his left hand. And my favorite thing about the Kyrie offensive explosion, because I even think against Oklahoma City it was being a little overstated, because I felt like he was actually a little too passive in that series.
Yeah.
For long stretches, because I would look at the stuff he was turning down, which we've already covered. But then there was a moment where it was like, okay, wait, they're really gearing up. Like Minnesota, I felt like had these 2 like peak output defensive stretches. One was after the Ant dunk, and then there was another one there in the fourth quarter where they were trying. I mean, they were trying their hardest. And then for Luka to have the luxury just to throw it to Kyrie, and he turned the corner, that made it 111-105. And at that point, Minnesota had gone over 4 minutes without a field goal. So it's absurd that you have somebody like Luka. But, this is the whole part about Dallas is like, if we're saying this now, how come we didn't believe a little bit earlier? I didn't realize that Jaden Hardy would come in and give him great minutes. We're talking about what do you give up? And I would agree with you. I'd probably want to shrink the paint or collapse the paint, whatever you want to say, and leave the corners. And then Oklahoma City saying, yeah, that's what we tried to do. And then PJ Washington turned into an all-star. And then Derrick Jones had his massive game. So all of this has worked, and the Lively Gafford part of it. And I mean, Exum, who was actually like a nice little piece for them, hasn't even been needed. And Hardaway's been like nothing, even though he's back and healthy. It's just incredible how much this team has come together. Yeah. I mean, he played the other night, but you don't even notice him out there. So
I don't think he got out there today. Yeah.
The other thing, go ahead. Do you have more on that? Because I think.
Well, just you mentioned the Derrick Jones thing. Him and Washington were 5 for 7 from 3 in the first half, right? These are guys that are in the low 30s usually as 3-point shooters. And those guys have come through, and that's part of playoff basketball, right? Certain guys rise to the occasion, the crowd, the spotlight, the energy, and they targeted those dudes, and those guys have shown up. I watched Derrick Jones for years on I don't know how many teams he was on. Never really stood out. It was always like, oh yeah, seems like
Sick
a
dunk.
fairly interesting defensive guy, but wasn't somebody that I thought would be hitting huge shots in a conference finals.
No. I mean, the thing is, because of the Luka part of it and because of having to make sure you're paying attention to what side Kyrie is on, there's just a lot of open shots. To ask a defense to go, hey, make sure we're switching or make sure we're blitzing. I thought Minnesota did a better job extending the pressure out to them, but Luka just figures it out. And if Kyrie's coming off of that, if two are on the ball and Kyrie's able to get the ball 4-on-3 with his speed, so it's come together, man. It really has, and it's. I was wrong that I thought Minnesota and Denver was the NBA Finals because I didn't know that Dallas was going to take it to this level. I mean, I know these games are all close, and there's other stuff that I want to talk about, but I'm kind of in awe of what I've seen this team do, especially to close threes. You figure just the law of averages, they'd have a clunker to close in one of the three against Minnesota's defense, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah, you figure game one, it's I think Minnesota's up with 2 minutes left. Game two, they're up 5 with 90 seconds left. And over again, Dallas defense just stepped up, and then Dallas would make shots. And it got to the point where in game three, like I said earlier, you just felt like if that was going to be the situation again, Minnesota was screwed. This is something that has evolved. I feel like Dallas figured themselves as a team during that Clippers series, and now looking back at that OKC series, because I thought OKC was right there that whole series. And that, as I said last week, I thought that came down to a couple rebounds and a couple shots. But now I kind of respect the OKC team even more because they were throwing haymakers and Jalen Williams wasn't even playing that well, and they stayed in that series, and it was a 6-gamer.
That's true because, think about it. PJ's not fouled in the corner. Who knows? OKC wins game 6. Maybe Jalen Williams wakes up. They're at home. They've got game 7 at home, and we're going, oh, man, Dallas is going to be a sneaky, interesting team next year, But instead, they're up 3-0 on a team I figured after the Denver series was the best team remaining in the NBA.
So we're still in the pregame show. I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't.
But one of the guys on the set said some guys had to step up.
Get out.
It was a new thing. Can't remember hearing that before. And I think it was Shaq who said he'd like to see Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns step up.
I would like to see it. I agree with him.
Anthony Edwards kind of stepped up. Towns stepped backwards and down. He stumbled down. What's the opposite of a step up? A stumble down? It got to the point I was teasing House at halftime that he was going to be in the Wizards next year. House didn't like it. There was some unprintable text that returned. Towns was just awful. Just awful. Ant, who for 2.5 games just looked like his superpowers had been, the plug had been unpulled. Then all of a sudden he found the superpowers again. But it was a little too late. What are you seeing?
Well, the series could be summarized with this. Coming out of game 1 and 2, you had the differentials. Ant and Cat were 21 of 69. Luka and Kyrie were 41 of 88.
Oof.
So that's 20 more makes from the 4 best guys on the Dallas side. You're going to lose. Like when I see that kind of thing, I'm like, I'm shocked. They were in both of those games and threw them away. Today it was 6 more makes for that side of it. So it actually somehow improved. Let's just do the Cat part first because it's easier. He's not that good. He's not that good. We know he can stretch the floor a little bit. This best shooting big man thing is so fucking stupid. He takes 4 a game. His drives against Lively are like golfing with somebody who's never golfed before. And you're like, where the fuck are you aiming? You're like, oh, right over there. Like the flag. You're like, that's the American flag. That's at the clubhouse. The flag is over there. He actually got a little bit better on the drives today when Lively went out. But I went back and looked at every shot attempt he had, and believe it or not, I thought it was going to be worse going into it. There's more good shot attempts than bad shot attempts. He was handed a lot of shot clock grenades in the first 2 games, but the drives themselves are pointless. They're just pointless, and you can see what he's doing. He's like, but might as well drive. And then when everybody went small and he was still in, maybe Gaffer was back at that point, he couldn't post Kyrie, and it led to a turnover. He lost his positioning against Kyrie, so he is a huge part of the problem, but the biggest problem is that Ant isn't even close. So I expect that from Cat. I don't expect Ant to have these many bad moments, which we can go to here. Like, what do you think is, when you see Ant right now, like, where are you with it?
I'm going to sound like I'm making excuses for him, like I'm related to him. And I don't mean to sound that way. I think the playoffs are really hard. I've been on a lot of texts because people know that I like Edwards and just like, what's happening to your guy?
Getting a lot of
that.
The
playoffs are hard. He's 22 years old. It's the third round of just a whole level of basketball and intensity and energy. And the only reason I mention this is because I watched it happen to Tatum 2 years ago. And I'm watching Tatum in these playoffs 2 years later versus what was happening to him as the third and fourth round of 2022 went on. And it's weird. The playoffs kind of, for young guys, they kind of break your brain if you're not ready for it, if you haven't been through it, if you don't understand it. The only way I can compare it, and again, I know it sounds like I'm making excuses for Ant. I'm not. The only way I can explain it is it's like a boxing match when you see this guy who's never been, like in the old days when we had the 15-round fights, and it was the first time I was like, oh man, 15-round title fight. Man, these extra 3 rounds are awful. I can't believe this last 9 minutes. I never knew it was like this. Like, you're just not conditioned for it yet. And that's what I see with him. I don't, like, he was so tired and so out of it in game 1, and then game 2, it felt the same way. He just didn't have the same energy. So they did all the stuff they did for him today, where they're trying to hide him on, non-scorers. They're having other people bring the ball up. It seemed like a whole bunch of things to just try to have him have energy in the second half. So it sounds like an excuse, but I just think there's a reason 22 and under guys have not won 4 straight playoff rounds. That it's that unusual. It's basically Magic Johnson. And Magic Johnson was not somebody who had the ball all the time. He was on a team with Kareem, who was the best player in the world. So, 2 years from now, is he going to get to round 3 and just look like he has no power left in his battery? I don't think so.
I agree with a lot of what you said, because that's usually the way it goes, which is what made it so exciting with him and the Denver series. You're like, wait, is this really going to happen? Like, when I was walking around getting ready for that game 7, I was like, is he really going to do this? Now, granted, he went 6 of 24, so they didn't win because of him. But to come back against Denver down 20, like, all right,
his defense was incredible in that game, though.
Right. But still, you got to be better.
He
than
hasn't been
6-24.
impacting this series defensively like he impacted that game 7.
No, but they're tougher matchups too. So I think the point, it isn't really making excuses. I think that was the excitement about him, to be like, are we actually going to see a guy 4th year in, 22 years old, take this kind of jump and like maybe win a title? Like, what is this?
It's almost like a rookie quarterback. Like, wow, this guy's just going to rip through the playoffs? Guy's 22.
And I know I'm guilty of like thinking about, but even when I would get excited about it, going like, I think he can do it, I'd go, wait, like, you've been watching this league a long time. This isn't really what's supposed to happen. And so game 1, him being tired, if you're 22, it's just not really much of an excuse. There's days off. I think of the combination of the Kyrie part, but also he played so much point guard in game 1. Like, I was going back and looking at it, I was like, all right, so he's bringing the ball up the entire time because they're worried about Conley's injury, and he had left the game today and then came back. He's actually been pretty steady for him.
And then he was in game 1 guarding Kyrie for a lot of that game too. Like, it was what they asked him to do in game 1 was
right.
I think stupid.
So then you look at the game 1 drives, because I was looking at every one of his shot attempts. He had one like touch in the paint the entire second half of game 1. So you feel a little bit better about game 2, because I thought we saw some more aggressiveness, but then the turnover at the end is inexcusable. You can't do it. And I know people are on Finch's case for not calling the timeout to get Conley back in the game, and that's a fair criticism. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you also don't expect Ant to throw it out of bounds. The spacing on that play was terrible. Gobert has Gafford pinned at the rim. I think Nas and Kyle are to the left side, and they're actually like on top of each other in the corner, like they're getting ready to break out of an inbounds play. But then Ant still throws it out of bounds. And then tonight, the drives were better, but he's been missing layups like crazy. He missed 4 straight layups that were good looks in game 2. He had the missed layup when they were small, and he got the ball back, and he waited. They had a timeout. And it's like, dude, what do you think's going to happen? This is closing time of game 3 of the playoffs. Like, you got to get rid of the basketball or dribble out of there. And he lets himself get tied up. And even though he won
that
the
was
tip,
weird. He
they
froze.
lost the possession. Yeah, he completely froze. So those moments are, despite his greatness and what he was doing in the third quarter, it's unfortunate because I thought, like, with his personality, his attitude, and his just, this is not the guy staring down Kevin Durant saying, "You're done and I'm next." This is a guy that looks really uncomfortable in some big spots. And it's disappointing for how great I think he is, but it doesn't mean anything. It also means, like, okay, he's actually likely to go through the normal course of events for the great players in the league. Because a lot of these guys are already on vacation, post on Instagram, and he's playing in the Western Conference Finals, but he hasn't been good.
It still sounds like we're making excuses for him, and we're not.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Look, if he sucks like this for 2 more playoff seasons, all right, sign me up. I'll say I was wrong.
Right.
But there's also an incredible joy with this because of the Jordan comps, which no one's saying was actually saying, I think this guy's going to be better than Jordan. It's just that he looked like him.
Well, I think
physically.
what was so fun about the first series and a half was all the history we had with somebody at that age trying to do what he was trying to do, said this shouldn't happen. It's impossible. And then he kept making it seem like it was possible, which was what was so freaking exciting about it. And guess what? It's really hard. You're 22 years old. But I'm telling you, we watched this with Tatum and Edwards, maybe the ceiling for him as a player might be a whiff higher than Tatum just because of, as good as I think Tatum is, the ceiling for Edwards is, don't you think, like maybe a smidge higher as a star? But Tatum went through all of this in 2022 is my point.
I'm not going to let these, by the way, I'm not going to let these 4 games make me like go, oh, maybe this guy isn't going to be that good. I'm not there yet.
But the bigger issue is Towns is in his late 20s and they needed him in game 2 and they needed him tonight and he sucked the whole series. And it's gotten to the point that when he drives to the basket, it looks like he's wearing somebody else's sneakers. It's like, what did Towns bring his sneakers? No, he's wearing some kid from the first row who's a size 14. He's never worn these sneakers before. He just looks clumsy. He's missing wide open shots. I don't feel like his shots are going to go in. And you think about how he played those first 3 quarters of the Denver game 7, where it was like, it felt like there was some sort of breakthrough for him. And now we've gone backwards to the point that, we're probably going to be making up Towns trades in a couple weeks because the salary cap for them is outrageous, and I don't know if it's sustainable to keep this team together and just be $75 million over the cap. And if you think you can't keep Towns, Naz Reid, and Gobert going forward for the next few years on a small market team, like, you got to figure out something. But the bigger question to me is, like, I just think this is who he is. I don't know if there's a level up for him. And this is a reason we've spent so much time talking about him, being like, what is this guy? Is he good? Is he not good? Is he the best shooting big guy in the league? Or is he somebody that just, against when he's playing worse teams or lesser opponents, he looks great. But if you keep upping the stakes, he can't kind of hang on as the stakes keep going up, because he was a liability tonight.
He got benched in game 2.
And he got benched in game 2.
Like, who are the Towns fans? Like, who's like, my favorite player is Karl-Anthony Towns.
They need him on that. I mean, they ran it a couple times tonight when he sets the screen for Edwards, and it's a little pick and pop, and it's like, in theory, that play should be unstoppable, but for whatever reason, Dallas Stairs, it's not.
And by the way, because they already have Nas, and we saw what they were without Cat, like, there was a fear, okay, maybe there just won't be enough offense. I mean, the irony of this Minnesota thing in the closing moments of these last 3 games is that it felt like this is a real problem for them during the regular season. We were like, it'll be weird, though. What's the clutch offense going to look like? And then if you look at the clutch playoff stats, their offensive numbers are actually pretty good. The shooting numbers are pretty good. They just weren't in a lot of minutes. And I'd imagine those stats are going to be dragged down again tonight. I mean, they were brutal. I mean, they had like 2 points from like 5:54
in the first 2 games. The last 3 minutes, they just turnover, miss shot, turnover. It just was bad. And Dallas has a good defense. What's interesting about Dallas, Luka's one of those guys that in your head you feel like he's a bad defender, but he's not. And his hands are around. He's tipping stuff. Like, I think he had 5 steals tonight. And you wonder, like, at one point, Reggie Miller was asking why they didn't attack Luka. And it's like, I feel like they are trying to attack Luka. I feel like every team in the playoffs has tried to figure out how to attack him, but he's smart. He knows where to go and basically what he can't do. And very rarely do you see him 35 feet from the basket one-on-one. And if he is, they'll send a second guy out. Like, they don't want to expose him. That was one of the things Minnesota just wouldn't do with Gobert. But you think game one comes down to Luka makes a 3, Naz Reid misses a 3, right? I felt like they should have left Minnesota. The series should have been tied 1-1, but instead Dallas was up 2-0. And then tonight they should have won. But Dallas has been pulling these games out now for 4 weeks. And at some point, it's not an accident. At some point, every time you're in a close game, you win. It's not an accident.
Now, game 2 was the one that I had the hardest time with because you had the Jaden play where he loses out of bounds because Kyrie fouls him. And then it's like, hey, let's review it. That'll fix it. And instead, we just waste everybody's time to make sure the call is extra wrong. But, Ant can't throw it out of bounds. And you brought up something in the very beginning we started talking about. Like, I'm with you. Dallas, because it's Ant only, and there's crowds everywhere. I do think when they had that small stretch there, I would have thought, like, hey, bring Luka up, just see what happens against Ant. But I still think they would have just kept 2 with Ant and then ignored McDaniels and been like, fine, do you want to shoot a 3? Because we don't know what we're going to get out of you any single night. Conley's going to hit a couple floaters or a 3. That's fine. We don't trust Cat. Rudy can't catch. Rudy's only good with offense if it is already decided before the catch that it's going to be a dunk. If there's any moment where it's like, okay, I have the ball, now I have to figure out what to do, it's a useless possession. Kyle Anderson is somebody they don't even really defend, even though I think there were times in the series that I've liked when Kyle played against Luka.
Yeah.
And maybe it should have been a McDaniels, Kyle, Ant, Nas combo. But now I'm just making up shit. I'm making up shit for a team that just beat Denver by playing their way. But I felt like they were searching for it a little bit. It'd be interesting to see if they search a little bit more in 4.
That's a really important thing you just said. I think teams, when they get this far in the playoffs and through the season and they get to round 3, you become afraid to change who you are and what you were and how you got there. I even think Joe Maz was like this with Brissett, where it was clear that Brissett needed to play in this Indiana series, but Joe Maz, for 8 months, the team is basically, 73-20, playing a certain lineup, a certain way. And it's like, I don't want to play Brissett. I like playing my guys. Like, Hauser's lost his confidence now, right? What do you do with that going forward? You can't just be like, here are my guys. This is what's worked for us. Like, you have to adapt and move as the series has gone along. And I think Minnesota was a little afraid to move away from Rudy. And Towns don't you think Towns is one of those, he doesn't have it, guys? I feel like with Towns in the first quarter and a half. I don't know if it's coming back. No proof, just eye test.
And by the way, my small lineup, like experiment theory, Luka would probably be like awesome.
Cool. I'm just overpowering guys.
Right now it's so easy. So like I think your point though, whether it's interpreted as stubbornness, I think the coaches are always worried about losing somebody that's been important to what they've been doing.
But Minnesota benched Towns all through the end of game 2, right?
Well, they already lost. Yeah.
If you're not losing them at that point. Hey, on Luka, I went through this because the All-NBA teams came out, and I'm gonna fight for them to put positions back next year, because I thought the awards were ridiculous this year. The 4 centers on the first team all defense, one of the dumbest things we've ever done. Like, let's try to at least make this look a little like basketball. So when I talk about All-NBA, I'm comparing this year's voting to the history of the league. Anyway, Luka has made first team 5 straight years. And I was like, And I went through it and I was trying to figure out best streaks for first team All-NBA, which for some reason could not be Googled. StatMuse, get on this shit. I was really banking on you. I'd do this myself. Karl Malone and LeBron James made 11 straight first team All-NBAs. Did you know this?
I knew LeBron did. I didn't know Karl Malone did.
11 straight first team All-NBAs. Like, that's
incredible.
That's more than a decade. You have a 7-year-old kid the first year of the streak who's graduated from college by the end of that. Bob Cousy and Bob Pettit made 10.
Well, I must have got a lot of AP credits.
Oscar, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, all 9 in a row. Duncan and Kobe, 8 in a row. Shaq, Michael Jordan, Elgin Baylor, 7 in a row. Giannis and Harden, 6 in a row. And then Luka, KD, Dwight, and George Mikan, 5 in a row. All of those guys are like the greatest players in the history of the league. And Luka's 24. And we were texting over the weekend about like, what does this mean if Luka just wins the finals? Where does he stack? But like, when you think of the All-NBA resume, the fact that he already got to a conference finals with a team that really, when you look back, it's kind of crazy that they beat Phoenix in a Game 7, ended up losing to Golden State in 5. Just this career he's having and putting together, and he's still on the under 25 version of his 20s. And he's got the kind of game that I just feel like it's not, what's he going to lose athleticism? I mean, the only thing you would worry about is he going to get bigger than he is? Well, it doesn't even seem like his size seems like weirdly an asset. You know, it's almost a little like Jokic, where he's big enough that it's more of a problem than a hindrance for him. And I think it's a problem for the other teams. So, I think, especially if we're going to have 2 sweeps and we're not going to have the finals until a week from Thursday, this is just going to be a 9-day long Luka conversation, I think, over the Celtics. I think Luka, where does he fit? Is he the best player in the league? Can he be one of the best players of all time? Like, all of these questions are going to start getting asked now.
You're right. It's going to happen, and it's already started to happen. And this is why I want to talk about the belt transfer. But before we do any of that, what I do like about this developing storyline with Ant and Luka is the Luka part of this. There's like all the things you wanted Ant to be. Like, I did all these things already. Like, I didn't get to the Western Conference Finals at 22, but I mean, he turned 25 in February, so he was only, a year off from that? So he was 6 months, maybe older, I think, than Ant being in the Western Conference Finals this year. So with the speed with which we move and kind of re-ranking all these guys, which is, I think, like, I can become stubborn, or I can seem stubborn, or I don't want to, because I think the mistakes are made is when you're constantly changing everything, like on the latest outcomes. But when you look at Luka, the first year he's the leading scorer as a rookie. They go 33 and 49. The second year they have that great series against the Clippers. You're like, dude, this guy's going to be better. Right, 31, 10, and 9. And then the third year he loses in 7 to the Clippers, and his numbers are 36, 8, and 10. Like, those series were so much fun. And then the fourth year he's in the league, Western Conference Finals, they lose to Golden State. They didn't really have much of a chance. You look at his supporting cast with those teams, there's not much there. I mean, he's carrying that team, but they beat that awesome regular season Phoenix team the year after they had lost to the Bucks in the finals, which, again, we've been over that Game 7 plenty of times in the pod. Then last year's the year where things kind of fall apart. So I love the parallels of Luka getting through the West and maybe winning a title and being like, you guys were so ready to crown Ant, which, again, I'm raising my hand saying I'm fully guilty of. But, like, I just did all the things you were hoping Ant could do. Yeah. And like, there's never been like, Ant's had 3 games now in a row in this series where I'm like, what the hell's going on? And, you can find a bad game in there with anybody, but Luka's not going to have 3 games in a row in the playoffs. You're like, what's wrong with him?
Yeah, Luka can still go 7 for 20 in a playoff game and still seem like he's the best player and still be impactful in all these different ways. He'll still grab 11 rebounds and get 9 assists. Did you see that stat they showed with the alley-oops? And this was like, I think in the second quarter, where Dallas had 45 alley-oops in the playoffs and the next highest team had 9.
It was the most.
They probably ended with 50. They said the most since, 2001?
Yeah, so I was trying to write it down, and I was like, TNT, you have to, like, for the note takers, you're going to be slower with these graphics.
That was
because when I saw it, I went, wait, what? Like 45, and then it's like some wilt number, and then here was second place. And his lobs, I said Trey is probably the best, but Luka's size allows him to
Jokic
just
is
stop.
good too. I would say it's Jokic and Luka in the finals for the Labs.
I think Trey's up there, man, because he does a really great job of
The Brooklyn Nets,
away.
Trae Young.
Trey's awesome with lobs, so he's a tier 1 lobber. How about that?
Barclays own Trae Young.